I had to do my plug-in mic today because for some reason my Bluetooth just turned off on my computer. So I usually have a microphone and headphone set that cuts out all of the background noise, and I'm sorry that I cannot do that today. You'll just have to forgive me. You'll have to work with me. Hopefully, in the future, I can raise funds. I can kind of attract the right people to be able to get a manager or a production team or something like that, and we can make this a little bit more professional than what it currently is. Friendly reminder for those of you who are also jumping into the live stream today. Um, you're welcome to jump into to see the slides, to see what we're talking about today. We're talking about racial identity development. All you have to do is click the link in my bio, and the link in my bio will take you to a Zoom link that will then invite you into this space, and you're welcome to be here. After the talk, we'll have a Q&A session, and hopefully everything will be fine. I'm just hoping my computer doesn't do the horrific thing of then just suddenly restarting in the middle of while I'm talking. But I don't. we're gonna pray that that doesn't happen today, and that the devil's not throwing ruts in my bike wheels. All right. Anyway, we're jumping into this. We're talking about racial identity development. What does it have to do? What does it look like? What is racial identity development in a stepwise, progressive fashion? And how does it look? I'll be talking about this in a few ways. First of all, this is limited discussion here. It's contextualized by racial identity development in the context of the United States. Okay. I cannot necessarily speak to racial identity development outside of the US, but even as I'm talking about this within the context of the United States, there are still, in fact, some limitations. Yet another set of limitations here is that for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of time, I am condensing this down into three main groups. The three main groups I will be talking about are African Americans or Black people, biracial or multiracial people, and then white people by comparison. Okay. Now, this is not just a black versus white issue. There is still the function of Asian identity development. There is still the function of Chicano identity development. So please understand that while I am talking about this in a limited scope, I am very keenly aware that there are still other people whose identities are not being acknowledged in this discussion. I just want to draw attention to that and make notice of it, just so that you don't feel like you're being ignored or rendered invisible here. Now, before we jump into talking about racial identity development, I need to establish the cultural context, right? I already mentioned that we're talking about this in the context of the United States. Okay. However, what you also need to know is this concept called cultural hegemony, or what it means to live in a hegemonic culture. And what does that have to do with identity? We'll get to that in a moment. When we're talking about cultural hegemony, we are talking about the views of a dominant group and its ideologies over other groups. One of the foundational sociological theorists, whose name was Antonio Gramsci, is kind of the father of this idea. He says very succinctly that cultural hegemony is the idea that the dominant ideology of society, the beliefs, the explanations, perceptions, values, and morals, reflect that of the ruling class. The dominant ideology justifies the social, political, and economic status quo as natural, inevitable, perpetual, and beneficial for everyone, rather than as an artificial social construct that benefits only the ruling class. And this contextualizes the identity that we all develop in. When we live in a hegemonic culture, we're talking about the hegemonic culture in the US that centers whiteness. Right? Whiteness is centered as a norm, it's centered as a standard from which then other non white peoples must develop a culturally sound, culturally competent identity around whiteness functioning at its center. Okay. Now, cultural hegemony can, in fact, be used to justify or support a social hierarchy or political domination in that regard. And some symptoms of a hegemonic culture that you will often observe is that people belonging to a hegemonic culture will often identify themselves in one of two ways. They will either see themselves as belonging to the dominant group and therefore they are better than all those who do not, or to some extent, they see those people who do not as somehow being lesser than. Then on the other side, those people who are not contextualized to identifying with the dominant group will inherently be positioned in a way where they are raised to see themselves as lesser than. Now, as people grow into adulthood, those beliefs modify, they change, they evolve, and we'll certainly be talking about that as we move forward in the discussion. But in general, when you're in a hegemonic culture, it creates this us versus them phenomenon. It creates a phenomenon in which it is the people who belong to the white group compared to those people who do not belong to the white group. Who carries legitimacy? Whose perspectives and experiences are considered to be valid or valuable or worthy of attention? So on and so forth. And so now when I begin to talk about identity development and specifically racial identity development, I want you to be able to connect in the back of your mind how people are developing racial identities that are almost explicitly, but then also implicitly connected to whiteness. Okay. So, first of all, before we talk about identity development, I want to talk to you a little bit about identity formation. What is identity formation? Well, very simply, it is the distinct personality that a person develops during particular stages of their life, in which individual characteristics are either possessed by that person, or they can be to some extent aspired to be acquired, right? That in the development of a person's identity, they are identifying characteristics, mannerisms, forms of expression that they deem as belonging to their true and authentic selves, right? And so there are different dimensions of identity, right? These would be the intersections of identity, so to speak. Perhaps different aspects of a person's identity is not just racial, it can be ethnic, it can be national, it can be religious, it could be gender identity, it could be class, it could be ableism, it can be any other form of intersectionality outside of that which we will be primarily talking about today is racial identity. And so in the formation of all of those aspects of a person's identity, that person is trying to find a sense of continuity within themselves. They're trying to find the thing that makes them unique. They're trying to find ways in which they feel like they belong to a broader whole or a group of humans in this regard. And so there are lots of people who then experience discontinuity. The most relevant cultural example right now appears to be in the context of gender when it comes to body dysmorphia, right? Is that sometimes there are people that experience discontinuity with what they see themselves truly as and how society, the world around them, paints them to be, right? And so that on its own can be a significant source of stress for that individual if there's any form of discontinuity. So when we're talking about racial identity formation, then, and we're talking about racial identity formation for non-white peoples living in a white-centered society, you can then see how this circumstance might implicitly set people of color up for significant experiences around stress, racialized stress, so to speak. Okay? Now, with the process of racial identity formation, it is then the process of recognizing the uniqueness of oneself or others on the basis of race or ethnicity in the context of their social environment. All of us know who we are, we know how we identify, we know those other groups of individuals, we know how they identify, and maybe we don't identify the same ways that they do. And so we are then able to see and distinguish between ourselves that then gives us some kind of feedback on how we see ourselves. So now I want to read you a little bit of a thought experiment, if you will. And what I want you to do is I want you to close your eyes and just hear this prompt and listen to it for just a moment. I'm going to put you in the position of a non-white person who is developing a sense of identity in a white-centered environment. Okay? So close your eyes, open your ears, and just listen to this for a moment. Imagine for a moment that you have just reached the young age where your environment has become impressionable on you. You've begun to formulate your own set of ideas, grown capable of articulating your thoughts, and are becoming increasingly socialized with others. In your growth and maturation, however, you've managed to pick up on a subtle cue about the social ins and outs of your environment. Those who are regarded as black, for example, are bad, and those whom are considered white are good. No one has explicitly taught you this. It just so happens to be exemplified by the overwhelming glamour of whiteness in your surrounding culture. It's in the beauty products advertised to you through magazines and television, the racial homogeneity of the superheroes you admire, the disproportionate number of whites in positions of power and privilege, and the negative societal attitudes towards almost anything African or black. Thick, nappy hair, Afrocentric names, darker skin, for example. Naturally, you might consider yourself to be inherently good. After all, you're only human. And so you might intrinsically place yourself in a position of positivity, goodwill, and good intention, which you would expect others to recognize and reciprocate. But along comes the caveat. You must reconcile that society regards you to be black and therefore associates you with those symbolisms of negativity. Your society accordingly treats you and people like you on the very basis that your mutually shared cultural values dictate. Even further, these same deleterious cultural beliefs have been fixed into the very structure of your own psyche. And so you constantly endure inward mental attacks regarding your own inferiority, your own sense of beauty, and your own capabilities as a Black person. How do you think you would feel? Would you feel apathetic, concerned, bothered, maybe? It is a position, excuse me, in which two aspects of your identity, your exogenous identity and your endogenous identity, have been implicitly pit against one another. And I want you to think about that for a moment. Sit with the reality that you might be inheriting cultural norms and values that are explicitly and implicitly anti you. And yet, because of who you are, you have to develop a sense of identity within that culture. How might you feel? What kinds of thoughts might go through your mind? How might you reflect on the world around you? And so that's what we're going to be exploring today. I have lots of visual examples. I've also been sure, I made sure of this, that when I show videos, there is audio available. If there is not audio, if any of my participants in the chat could please chime in and just tell me that you cannot hear the audio, and I will immediately fix it because I know how. Although I'm fairly confident that I've fixed this issue. So just let me know if you can't hear anything. Okay. Now, before I start talking about racial identity formation, racial identity development, I need you to understand something very important here. The important aspect that I need you to consider is, first of all, these stages of development are not age dependent. Okay. It's not like once you hit the age of 5, you're going to suddenly launch into stage 2. Once you hit the teenage years, you're going to launch into stage 3. There are many different people that go through these developmental stages at different points in time, and not everybody is at the same developmental stage. Okay. So that's the first thing I want you to consider. You might also consider that while I'm talking about these forms of development as existing in multiple stages, it is entirely possible for any single person to occupy multiple stages. You can almost consider these stages of development as being more fluid in nature rather than just discrete. I need to emphasize to you also that when I'm talking about these different stages of development, I am emphasizing them in a conceptual context. I'm not treating them as if they are law. I'm not treating them as if they're like normal, right? As if it's something for us to just like it's something you can diagnose. That's not how this works, okay? But in so doing, you'll see the significance here. And then lastly, just to reiterate, this is not a black versus white issue. Okay. Okay. Now, in general, here is the table for the stages of development that I am going to go through. Okay. Now, it looks a little overwhelming and perhaps intimidating on its own, but I will simplify for you how we're going to go about doing this. We're going to do this in an organized fashion. Okay. Obviously, we're going to start with stage one. But as we go through stage one, we're essentially going to go through each racial identity one by one. So we're moving on to stage two, we'll cover each racial identity. Moving on to stage three, cover each racial identity. Stage four, so on and so forth. At no point should you be lost in how I'm covering these things. Hopefully, you don't get lost. I have tried to make this as simple and intuitive as possible. Okay. So starting with stage one for Black people, okay? Stage one in general is called the pre-encounter stage, okay? In the context of the pre-encounter stage, we're talking about young people, generally, very young people who are still becoming acculturated and socialized to their cultural surroundings. Okay. Many of them have absorbed all kinds of social values and beliefs, specifically about white culture, but more so just about the culture that they live in. Okay. At this particular stage, there is less of an emphasis on a person's racial group membership. Okay. Generally speaking, you don't often see these very young people, maybe as young as 5 years old to like 8 years old. They don't really put too much emphasis on being Black, being white, being biracial. It's not really something that is significant to them at this developmental stage. So, in essence, then, they are largely unaware of like race or racial implications in this regard. Yes, they know how to name race. They know the difference between Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, etc., but they don't really put so much emphasis on it like the rest of society does. Okay. So for the Black person, we are now talking about the pre-encounter stage. Well, what does this look like? Here's the first video here I want to show you, and then we'll talk about it.
Which doll is the black
Oops, sorry.
doll? And which one is the white doll?
That one.
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because she's white and he has 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's Black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me.
Yeah, which one looks like you?
And that one.
Okay.
That doll.
Okay, so what you can see here, right, is these are young children. They're cognizant of racial identity and racial difference, but they're also reflecting the values of the culture that they're growing up in. Now, being reasonable people, we could make the assumption that their parents aren't sitting there saying, "Oh, you're ugly because you're Black. Look at your hair. And oh, look at that beautiful white kid over there. Wish it was you." They're not saying things like that. It's more like these children are absorbing both explicit and implicit cues specifically from their cultural environment that is leading them to re-articulate or regurgitate values and beliefs that have existed in society for quite some time. Okay. And so it's at this age, you don't usually see children who are emphasizing that they're Black and their affiliation with Black identity or something to that effect, right? You don't see that for white children. You don't see that for Hispanic children. Okay. And so then it becomes a thing where you have to question, well, yeah, we kind of know where they're getting it from, but where are they getting it from? And then how, more importantly, how does this emphasize or influence how they will then develop their later life identity? How will they then go about reflecting on their Blackness as they have internalized all of these anti-Black values? And you can see right here, specifically for these children, they're being implicitly set up towards a development rooted or contextualized in stress that perhaps white identifying children might not ever have to experience or think about. right? Very seldom will I do this, but I want to show one other video because I want to show you the reflection of somebody who is then articulating, I suppose, on the back end, perhaps in hindsight or like retrospectively, what their thoughts or perspectives or experiences are on their racial identity from these experiences at such a young age.
Which
Okay. You might also hear a little clip as I'm going through, but listen to this. This is Baratunde Thurston.
My mother was really into the outdoors and nature, and we went camping. I did a lot of outdoorsy biking, trail hiking stuff, and so she took me and one of my friends, Reggie, camping somewhere in Virginia, and he and I were alone playing in the lake, and this little white kid comes out of nowhere. He was like an apparition, and he's like, "There's niggers in the water! There's niggers in the water!" And he and I were so shocked that we weren't instantly angry. We were like, where? Like, what are you doing? Oh my God, where? Let's get him. And then we're like, oh shit, he's talking about us. It went from shocking to absurd to hilarious to painful to fury-inducing to fearful. And then we realized, like, we're somewhere in Virginia in the mountains. This is not DC. This is not, Chocolate City anymore. And he and I knew each other from karate classes. So we looked at each other like, we could take this little boy so easily. But then what would happen to us? Like, that's not a good look. So we didn't do anything. We left, basically, and that little racist won that moment.
Right. So here's Baratunde Thurston articulating quite another area where he is not even really cognizant. He's aware of race. He's aware of racial difference, but he hasn't really reflected on what that means specifically for a person like him before he then realizes, kind of like the children in the last video we watched, that there is a source of stress that's going to come from the fact that there are social values that are anti-me, right? And so on this basis, there are lots of people that have these kinds of experiences, and I would invite the people who are listening on the IG Live right now, if you have access to Zoom or something like that, feel free to chime into this discussion, and then on the Q&A portion, please share your personal experience, because I want to hear those things. I want other people to hear them, because maybe you have something that's different, maybe you have something that's similar, and I want to hear that. I want to get that on record. Okay. Now, moving forward then, from Black experiences, we then have, for bi or more multiracial people, emphasis on personality. Okay. So stage one for the biracial or multiracial person is really just, I have a sense of myself. Kind of like Black people too. There's no real emphasis on like ethnic belonging, ethnic grouping, or anything like that. Again, generally the context of the stage here is that it is very young. It's where you're just a person and you don't really put emphasis on difference. And from the same CNN docuseries here, the first time I realized I was Black, here's yet another person who's talking about this, but in the context of being biracial.
I remember being in elementary school. I remember being young enough because I remember my hair being short and wild and curly, and I was still at that age when I was kind of carefree. But it felt as though it was that moment of awareness, right? Maybe it was around the time that you start being a little more self-conscious and stop skipping and singing to yourself and making funny voices. I mean, I do that again now, but that's a different story. I remember sitting in front of the mirror, and I really saw myself in the mirror, I think for the first time, if you know what I mean, really seeing yourself. And I remember seeing myself and being shocked at who I saw. And I remember thinking, oh, that's why people look at me. I grew up in a town where there was nobody that looked like me. And I knew my parents, who are both white, my adoptive parents, who I only call my parents, mom and dad, they're white. And it's sort of all, I remember it all kind of coming like, oh. And it didn't feel foreboding. It just suddenly, there was clarity. And it was later on when I was in high school I remember seeing when that clarity did become a negative, when I was seen as other.
See, so for the biracial person, they're articulating the same phenomenon is to some extent you're growing up and you don't see any emphasis on yourself until suddenly you realize, yeah, maybe that's why other people are treating me differently. And wait, oh, what does this mean for me? And oh, right? And so then it would be interesting then to start wondering, well, yeah, okay, because she's half black, and that makes sense that she's going to share the same kind of experience with other black people. But then what does it look like for white people, especially in a white-centered cultural context and
I
environment?
remember
Okay. And so for white people, yes, there's a lot more information on the screen. I apologize for that, but this is still kind of like pre-encounter, pre-context, personal identity-ish, if you will, right? Is that at stage one, they just see themselves as an individual. And I will go so far as to say there are many white adults who stay in stage one. They never really go past stage one. So please remember, like I said, that even though there are lots of children that go through stage one and then advance onto stage two, this isn't really age dependent here. So you do, in fact, have lots of white people who are just in stage one, and that's where they find their comfort and that's where they stay. And part of that is because they're adhering to this notion of color blindness. They follow this colorblind motto. Oh, your race means nothing to me. I don't really see anything on it. It doesn't matter. There's and part of that de-emphasis on color has to do with how they've been socialized too. Part of whiteness, as I've talked about in the weeks prior, is that to some extent you are acculturated or socialized to see that if you can notice or name race or racism in any way other than one person being rude or mean to another person, that somehow then means that you're a bad person. Okay, so on that basis, this good bad binary motivates lots of white people to stay in stage one. Okay, um, and so, yes, of course, they see racial difference. They know what a black person looks like. They know what white people look like. They know what Asian people look like, et cetera, et cetera. But to some extent, it's kind of forced, but it's also genuine and sincere too, is that they don't find it salient. They don't find it meaningful or significant. And because they've been taught that to see it as a significant aspect of a person's identity is to be bad, it motivates them to turn away from it. Right. So, in essence, then, when we're talking about racism, when everybody else is complaining about racism and racial discrimination and police brutality and Black Lives Matter and blah, 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 it feels to the white person at stage one that like racism is being propagated. Right? If we're going to talk about race or racism in some meaningful way, then the people who are naming race, the people who are describing it, they're the racists. Right? And so there's an issue here where we shouldn't be talking about race. It's uncomfortable to talk about race. Okay. And so these people at stage one are not necessarily consciously trying to demonstrate that they have racially provocative views or beliefs or anything like that. Right. And if an individual is then confronted with real world racialized experiences where they can see that they, as a white person, have distinct, unique experiences that are different from other people of color, they might move on to stage two. But in general, lots of white people, even throughout their adulthood, and I would go so far as to say for a large portion of the rest of their lives, never go beyond stage one of just I don't see any emphasis on race. I don't put emphasis on it. I don't see any meaning in it. The Black Lives Matter people need to shut up, and so do the racist white supremacists too. And so there. This is what that looks like. I have two distinct videos here. Both of them are adult-ish people. Okay, these are videos from the Whiteness Project here. Okay, so here's the first individual.
Your color means absolutely nothing to me. You're a human being, just like I'm a human being. And I just don't buy into the nonsense about discrimination. I mean, I feel that everybody's equal, and that's the way it should be. I mean, I've worked, the fields I've worked with, whether you be black, whether you be Latino, if you have it upstairs and you really commit to do what you're wanting to do with your life, I don't think that race really has anything to do with anything. You're given, your cards, and it's the way that you play them.
Okay, so the first thing you are seeing here is that, and to some extent, he's not really forcing this rhetoric. It's not really fake. He truly believes this to some extent. And the end of the video, for those of you who are listening on IG Live, it says 73% of whites believe blacks should receive no special favors to overcome inequality. And that's genuinely because, like I said, a large portion of white people stay stuck in stage one. And this isn't a hierarchy. I'm not trying to assign any kind of moral value here to somehow say that whoever is in the chat, could you please mute your microphone? Thank you. There isn't any emphasis here on difference, and in fact they feel like in order for everybody to be equal, everyone is equal, and that's just how it is. And if you want to force special privilege, well, then that's where the racism is. If you want to give reparations to a specific group of people who've been racially persecuted, well, that's problematic because that's racial favoritism. So you can see how it becomes almost like a double-edged sword. It's rooted in naivete, but it's also rooted in just racial illiteracy. Okay. Now, hear this young girl who articulates a different aspect of stage one.
I think I don't think about race because I don't talk about it. And the modern society is so obsessed with preventing a problem that all they do is talk about the problem, and that just fuels the problem. So, I mean, if we want to get rid of racism, stop talking about racism. And I'm just stop. And it's really not that hard. The reason I don't think about it is because I wasn't raised talking about it. Because it didn't matter to us, because we were all different colors, but we were all family. So we saw each other as a family member, an aunt, an uncle, a niece, a cousin. We didn't see each other as Asian or white or German or whatever. We didn't see that. We saw this is someone I love, not someone to be judged. And so I think that's the way that we could stop talking about it, is if we stop seeing each other as objects and start seeing each other as people, start loving each other more and not judging so harshly.
So you see here that she is putting emphasis on the fact that we just need to love each other. It's coming from this place of naivete that like nobody has a different experience than her, that if we're going to get rid of the problem of racism, her solution based on her own life experiences and what's true to how she identifies is to just stop talking about it. More importantly, for the people who are listening on IG, the end of the video, it says 73% of millennials believe never considering race would improve society, right? So here's where we're at. We're in a society where you have biracial people, black people that are at stage one articulating that they are experiencing racial persecution in some form. They're being singled out for their race. Their race is actually more significant than they thought it was. And then at stage one, you have a large number of white people who just stay stuck in this belief that like race is not important, right? And so if white people then are exposed to events or circumstances that challenge their beliefs around these things, then they will graduate into stage two. But most white people stay stuck at stage
Your
one.
color means that.
Okay. So stage two for the black person. Okay, we could articulate this as the encounter, and to some extent, that was what you heard from Baratunde Thurston too, and then what you saw with the cognitive dissonance that these young children are articulating around the Clark doll experiment is they are forced by a set of circumstances or events to then acknowledge the impact of their race, to acknowledge the significance of their race, and to some extent, it's kind of outside of their control. But they're forced to focus on their identity. You have to, and you have to be cognizant of it because other people are cognizant of it. And so it would be great if you could just live your life in the world as a human being, regardless of the color of how you look. But then what happens is that becomes a form of naivete that may bear potentially lethal consequences. Right. And so in this stage, then you have Black people that are trying to just figure out their identity. What does it mean to be Black? How is other people going to treat me? Can I anticipate these things to some extent? Right. And so then they become targets of more racism. And so this is articulated by W. Kamau Bell, one of my heroes. Yeah, just listen to what he has to say here.
I was 15 years old. I was in high school. And one afternoon, I was hanging out with my friend Rob, a white Jewish guy, at Rose Records in downtown Chicago. At one point, we got split up. And as I was waiting for Rob to show up again, I decided, nope, I'm going to find him. So I walked out of the third floor of the record store and down the stairs to the first floor of the record store. And as I walked out, this man behind me said, "Excuse me, I need to talk to you." I turned around. It was a white guy, probably in his 30s. And he looked at me and said, "I need to search your pockets." And I said, "Why?" He said, "I got a report that you took something." And I hadn't taken anything, but then I also had this weird fear of like, did I accidentally put something in my pockets? And so I suddenly felt guilty even though I knew I hadn't done anything. And then I said to him, "I know my rights," but I didn't really know my rights. So I let him search my pockets. I also thought if he searches my pockets, he'll realize there's nothing in there and he'll let me go on my way. But once he found out there was nothing in my pockets, it didn't deter him, and he grabbed me by the back of the coat and walked me downstairs and physically threw me out into the streets. And I was standing in front of the record store, sort of embarrassed and humiliated, even though I hadn't done anything. And I sat there starting to cry. And I knew I was Black before that moment. I grew up in a house where my mom certainly wanted me to know I was Black and let me know I was Black. But it wasn't until that moment that I realized being Black meant the exact same thing in the current era as it had meant throughout the history of this country, that at any point a white person could harass you for no good reason, and you kind of would have to take it.
Okay, so here's an example of encounter. It's like irrefutable circumstances, unavoidable circumstances. You just exist in a space, and then someone else comes out of nowhere and then is now racializing you. Right? So now imagine living in a world where you're a Black person who has these experiences either frequently, regularly, or at some unpredictable interval of occurrence. And then to be able to then just articulate those things, you have a group of white people that are going, "I don't believe you. I never see that. They don't emphasize those things. I didn't hear that. No, it didn't happen. Stop talking about race and racism." It becomes a phenomenon kind of like the one that you're observing today. Oh, Caleb says that same shit happened to me in Kroger in Galveston when I was 16 and I'll never forget. Yes, see? And there are lots of people who will articulate these kinds of things. So now imagine this is the reality this is what Black people are talking about, that this is what they're complaining about. And then to face the response of just stop talking about it and it will go away. Well, is that the truth? Right? Now, what do biracial people have to say on this front? Let's listen to this one. Okay, for biracial people, stage 2 is a little bit different. Yes, they're confronted with unambiguously clear forms of racialization. Okay, but for stage 2, for biracial or multiracial people, they're usually forced to like choose a side. They have like choice of group. Or like, because of a different set of complex factors, maybe they spend more time with one side of their family than they spend time with the other. Maybe they look a certain way and spend time around a certain group of people that they don't necessarily look for the other side of their parentage or their inheritance, right? And so either by pressure from their friends, pressure from their family, sometimes immediate family, it becomes a thing where they are pressured to like choose a side, and they have to, in essence, abandon the other side of themselves too. Okay, so this is what it looks like as this young woman is articulating here.
If I said I'm Black, people would believe me. If I said I'm Hispanic, people would believe me. If I said I'm white, nobody would believe me because I don't look white. Growing up, whenever I had to fill out whichever race group I was belonging to, I would always fill in African American just because that's what the teachers told me to do. I raised my hand and I said, I'm white, Hispanic, and black. Which one should I bubble? Bubble black. Always. And so I think it had more to do with maybe how my teachers perceived me than how I perceived myself, because if it were up to me, I would have bubbled all three. I think my life would be different if I married a white man. I think that I would just be perceived differently as well. I came home like a couple months ago and my mom was like, the way you are on Facebook makes you seem like you're black. And I'm just like, wow. I literally haven't changed anything. And my husband says things, and he thinks it's funny, and I guess it's kind of funny, but you're married to a black man, so you're black now.
Okay, so it's a thing where you have peers, you have spouses, you have friends. Maybe it's casual comments, maybe it's explicit encouragement, but in different ways, you have multiple sources of people that are then trying to force you to choose a side. And it's usually forcing you to choose the side that you look most closest to, but it usually also implies abandonment of the other side of your heritage too. For those of you who are listening on IG Live, the end of this video, it says 6.9% of US adults have at least two races in their background. Right. So imagine then facing this phenomenon where like your peers, your family, your forms of support are like forcing you to choose yourself. In essence, they're racializing you. Right. How would that make you feel? And then, okay, here we go. And then for white people, stage 2 is white guilt. Now, white guilt here can look like a set of different circumstances, right? Part of white guilt is carried by shame. Part of white guilt is just really, I would articulate it as the cognitive dissonance that comes from seeing what are irrefutably clear examples of racism or racialization in society that then forces you to reflect on, yeah, damn, wow, I had been saying all of these things, I had been believing all of these things, and now I'm realizing how wrong I was. And there's a level of shame that comes from that, right? So basically, they have encounters or experiences that challenge their worldview or their perception. And so then it elicits feelings of shame and guilt. Okay. And so these feelings can be modified, they can be avoided. And so some white people will attempt to avoid them. Well, maybe that was just a one-off circumstance. Maybe it was different than what I perceived it to be. And oh yeah, that's like one person, but it doesn't happen often. They will try their best to like reconcile, to dodge, to shift the goalpost, to do what they can to reduce the discomfort that comes from cognitive dissonance, right? But if the guilt is overwhelming, or in some cases, if it is successfully avoided, they will move on to stage 3. And for white people, there's stage 3A and then stage 3B. 3A and 3B are both dependent on whether they lean into those feelings of guilt and shame and reflect on them, or they successfully avoid them. And we'll talk about what they look like in a moment. But here's an example of white guilt.
There's been plenty of times where I have consciously taken advantage of the fact that I was white and always kind of knew that if I got in trouble that I could just get a lawyer, suit up, show up, and it was a slap on the wrist. I would be in jail if I wasn't white. I've been arrested probably over 20 times, and the only thing I have on my record to show for it is a public intoxication. And there've been some hefty drug possession charges, and I've never served time. I sold drugs. I basically did whatever I wanted to do, knowing that there was going to be absolutely no consequences, as what kind of the past showed me. I never felt guilt at the time because I never thought about it. but now that you mention it, there is a little bit of guilt in there, just because, you know, me talking about it openly is making me realize, damn, I'm pretty lucky.
Right? So here, this person has basically violated the law in whatever ways he knows he can get away with, and to some extent has conscious awareness that he can get away with it. And only when he's forced to reflect on these things does he then feel the guilt. Because then you have to reconcile how there are large numbers of other Black people that are incarcerated for crimes he's likely committed and hasn't had to serve time for. For those of you who are listening in on IG Live, the end of this video says white men are 6 times less likely to be incarcerated than Black men. And just last week, we were talking about mass incarceration, right? And so you can see here, like, faced with irrefutable circumstances that force you to reflect on reality as it truly is in the context of race, elicits a kind of guilt. Now, like I said, for white people, there is going to be either the guilt is so overwhelming that it's gonna shift in the direction of how they develop their identity moving forward, or they're gonna do what they can to mitigate and avoid reflecting on that guilt, and reckoning with that guilt that then shifts to another side of identity development. And we'll talk about that on the back end here. Okay. Stage 3 for Black people generally looks like you just have a desire to immerse yourself in your culture, your identity. You want to embrace it. You want to be loud about it. You don't want to feel shame about the fact that you're Black, as much as society appears to want you to feel shamed about it, that sees your Blackness as a marker of negativity, right? And so then what happens is in stage 3, there is an intentional and active avoidance of like associating with whiteness at all. So there are lots of Black people, for example, who live in white dominant neighborhoods, for example, or are going to PWIs, or they go to schools where they're primarily white, and they stay stuck in stage 2. Right. And so many of those people that stay stuck in stage 2, I have a kind of running hypothesis that I'm not quite sure how to go about scientifically verifying, but my suspicion is that those Black people that find themselves in these environments stuck at stage 2 inevitably become the Black conservatives that you see across social media. But nonetheless, if they are able to graduate into stage 3, it's often actively looking to identify with, associate with, and to find community of support around Blackness, right? Maybe they are actively seeking out how, like, their own history, their own culture. They're embracing this notion very unabashedly that Black is beautiful. Right. And so to its most extensive political end, you have lots of people from the civil rights era, from the Black Panther era, from the SNCC era, that embodied a lot of the characteristics that we would see in stage 3 identity development here. And I have a clip here from a film that I think perfectly exemplifies this.
But I'm here tonight to tell you that it is time for you to stop running away from being Black. It is time for you to stop running away from being Black. You're college students, right?
Right on.
You should think. It is time for you to understand that you, as the growing intellectuals of this country, that you must define beauty for Black people. Now that's Black power. Let me ask you something. Is beauty defined as someone with a narrow nose, thin lips, white skin? Hell no.
Hell no.
Because you ain't got none of that.
Okay.
Our lips are thick. Our nose is broad. Our hair is nappy. We are Black and we are beautiful.
Did I? Okay, sorry. In this clip, hopefully, you've seen the film Black Klansman. It's excellent. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. Here is an example of Black people that are displaying the characteristics of immersion, of stage 3 identity development. They don't find shame. They don't want to find shame in being Black as much as they're being persecuted and racialized in society. And they are actively leaning into their Black identity. And not necessarily, here is not an example of militancy or anything like that, but there's a fervor that's associated with this stage of immersion for Black people. Okay. For the biracial person, this is characterized by categorization, right? Where either the people around you, your peers, your parents, your friends, or something like that, in essence, are choosing your racial identity for you. Some aspects of this were articulated by the last biracial person, but I have another video that I think exemplifies this categorization stage of development too.
I am Black and blonde and very light, and my family is not. My Blackness was not as evident to people who don't have a vocabulary of Black attributes. The color of the skin, of my skin, and the color of my hair did not signify quickly that I was Black. I'm not Black from a distance. My family had moved to this nearly all-white suburban New Jersey town. I went to a all-white school. I made a friend, and she had the most impressive Barbie collection I had ever seen, and I was a budding fashionista even then. And we became friends through that, through Barbies. And I went to her house. Her mother discovered to whom I belonged. When her mother found out that I was the sister of those kids with the big afros, it was the 70s, I was no longer welcome in her house. That's the moment. That whiteness kept me out of her house. And I didn't know what to say to my mother, why I couldn't go there anymore, or how to explain it to my sister. Like, I just wasn't allowed because they saw who I belonged to, whose people I was.
Right. So here it's almost like the parents of her friends are just forcefully putting her into the Black category and then treating her on that basis. Right. And so this is where essentially her racial identity is being chosen for her. Right. She's not just biracial. She's not just half white, but rather she's just Black just by virtue of who she belongs to. Okay. And then well, not lastly, but next, for white people, right? Stage 3A. I told you, if the guilt that they experience is successfully avoided, then what happens is they never reflect on the realities of race and racism, which then leads them to acceptance of the status quo. Okay. And so what happens in the acceptance of the status quo is it's marked by a kind of blame the victim attitude. This is your Charlie Kirks, your Ben Shapiro's, your Donald Trumps. Any of those far right conservative identifying people often find themselves at a position where they know that society is racist. They know that it's being racialized, and they're intent on reinforcing those things. Right? Because they don't want to reflect with the reality that their own racial identity has some aspect here or some part to play in the racialization of others. So rather than reflecting on the discomfort they experience, they successfully avoid it and then lean into reinforcing the status quo. Okay. So yeah, they might openly recognize that white people have privileges. Maybe they'll say those things they deserve them, or maybe they earned them, or this happened because they conquered the world, or they have the greatest culture or something like that. You can jump into any of the comments on any of my reels and you'll see lots of examples of this, right? Okay. Maybe they'll find ways to like justify racial or social superiority, but like without using those words specifically. But in essence, the math of their rhetoric seems to suggest that, right? Um, and if they can combat these feelings, there's lots of white people that go through these stages and then inevitably on the back end end up on the 3B side of things, right? Where they can admit that there's a problem. But some people, if they don't overcome these feelings, then they end up identifying as like alt-right or they become white supremacists. And there's two examples I want to show you. One is a little more casual, and then the other is a little more explicit.
I don't see any, myself personally, of a race problem. I see a responsibility problem with people. When you don't support your own ethnicity from within your own communities, then you can't grow successful anyplace else. So I see that in the black community, that they do not support each other. And when there's a problem, it's always somebody else's fault. And then they'll say, well, the white guy still holds all the cards. No. It ain't the white guy, it ain't the black guy, Spanish guy. There's a lot of people holding a good hand in this country. It's what you do with it that counts. You can't point at the white guy anymore and go, hey, you're the one who's holding me back for 200 years. It's impossible unless you hold yourself back. So that's the way I look at it. Everybody's an individual to me.
Right. So what you're seeing here is reinforcement in the stage one identity and the stage one philosophy. They're still, or in their racial identity, they're still more advanced than just the innocence or the naivete that comes from stage one, but it's kind of reinforcing stage one mentalities, right? For those of you who are listening, the end of the video says 38% of white Americans believe that whites work harder than blacks. Okay. The other aspect of this is kind of relevant to today. Although this video is several years old, it's still very much relevant to what we're seeing today here. And it's far more explicit, but still characteristic of stage 3A, of like perhaps not acceptance of a status quo, but like reinforcement of the status quo.
My idea is simply this. America was built by and for the white Christian people of this nation.
We have been seeing really ever since Barack Obama first won election in late 2008, a growth in groups on the radical right. In 2008, we went from about 150 so-called patriot groups, anti-government radical groups, to something like 1,360 groups in 2012. In the last year, though, Donald Trump has added fuel to that fire in a very big way.
Tim, why are you here? Go. Why are you here, man? Go. Why are you here? Let's go.
Al Gore and George Bush and people like Mitt Romney and these people, they're all the same. You know, they're all the same type of candidates. So it's pretty interesting this year to see something a little bit different. So. You know, we support those nationalist principles like closing the borders and things of that nature. So we do support those things, but we're not going to come out and endorse them.
Donald Trump wants to bring back jobs to America, give dignity to the American worker.
It's not that Trump is telling these groups what to think. They have, had their own white supremacist ideology for many decades now. What Trump is doing is legitimizing.
I came here to speak on behalf of Donald Trump. I've never met the man, but I can.
So for those of you who are watching, just for the sake of time, I'm going to cut this video in half. I'd always planned to do that. But what you can see here is what you've already been seeing for the last few years, but this is very much indicative of stage 3A for a lot of white people. Okay, is reinforcement of the status quo, perhaps justifying or rationalizing the status quo to some extent. And yes, for those of you who are listening, I will be going a few minutes over. Apologies, but most people seem to like that. So I don't really, I suppose I don't need to apologize. But this is what you're seeing here this is how white people then find themselves identifying, empathizing with these groups and with their values. This is how they got here, is because they're undergoing the process of racial identity formation and development, and their own subjective or personal experience has led them in this direction.
I don't see.
Okay. Now, stage 4 for Black people looks like internalization. So now at stage 4, they've already gone through all of the very fervent beliefs and very passionate embrace of their racial identity, and now they're to a point where, for lack of a better language, they're just secure in their racial identity. They don't necessarily have to wear it out and wear it loud and shove it down people's throats. Not saying that's what's happening in stage 3, but rather that it's less of an in-your-face fervor and passion, and just more like they have pro-Black attitudes. Right? They can be very expansive, expressive, open, but they're less defensive about their racial identity too. They still experience unequal treatment, discrimination, overt forms of racism, but it's about rather they put more emphasis on establishing meaningful relationships with other people who can acknowledge and respect them, while also embracing other aspects of other people's identities as well. And so one example that I have here is several years ago, LeBron James had the word nigger spray painted, I think, on his front gate. And so here's him talking about this.
And people, of course, think you're the big sports star, so you're immune to any social issues. Unfortunately, you just had an incident. Somebody spray paints the N-word across the gate of your house in Los Angeles. This is where you live in the summer. Yeah. This is where your children sleep. What did it feel like to you?
Surprising, no. Because I still understand how race plays a huge part in America. And for me to be sitting here on the eve of the finals, one of the biggest sporting events in the world, and I have to answer questions about racism, it just lets me know that it's still here, and we should all know that. And if it takes for someone to spray paint my gate and use that derogatory term, that hate on my family, to shed a light on what the real issue is in the world, then so be it. And I think, and I sit here and say that I believe that's why, women like Emmett Till's mom left the casket open and showed everybody in the world what her son went through because of hate. So, I look at it and it hurts, and it's like unfortunate, and I got to sit here and I got to talk to my kids about what it means to grow up being an African American, a Black kid in America. If that can shed light on the whole situation and we can continue the conversation, because no matter how much money you got, no matter how famous you are, no matter how many people admire you, at the end of the day, being a Black man in America is very frightening, and it lets us know that we got so much further to go to be equal in this country.
All right, so here, first of all, I want to apologize for a little bit of the clippiness. I'm running multiple programs at once, so my computer kind of hiccups here and there. Hopefully you can forgive that. But here, LeBron James is articulating not just his own personal sentiments, but you can see that for him, at least at this particular moment in time, he's in stage 4. He's expressing stage 4 characteristics where he's embraced his Black identity. He knows the truth of his experience. He knows the truth of other people's lived experiences. But now it's less about being in your face, a black is beautiful attitude and combative, and more just about accepting and understanding the reality and trying to transform that into something that is more significant, more meaningful, more impactful towards the promise of a constructive outcome. Now, that is not to say that the people who are expressing stage 3 characteristics are not doing the same, because they want the same too. So please don't interpret my words as if to belittle the fervor and passion that is displayed from stage 3 passion, but just that stage 4 appears to distinguish itself specifically in terms of emotionality, right? For biracial or multiracial people, this is characterized by enmeshment, okay? Where at this point in time, they've been racialized so much by so many different people in so many different ways that it's led them to a place where they want to explicitly embrace these aspects of themselves, where now it's not I have to choose between this side or that side, but they both represent the full aspect of who I am as a human being, right? And so they feel freedom or the ability to then explore themselves and their identities without restriction, and to be who they are in their social circles, in their intimate relationships, while also rejecting this notion that they have to choose one side. Okay. And so this is best exemplified in this video right here.
Both white and black people would ask me, what was I? And so I asked my mom, what am I? And she said, you're a human being. I come from an interracial family. My mother is an immigrant to this country. She's British and my father's African American. And it was never an issue in our family. And the first time I remember how much some people, both adults and children, linked an opinion about skin color to your abilities was also in school. I was sitting in class and the teacher stood up and he was taking roll and he was trying to figure out whether I was black or white. And he looked at me and he said, you know what? You're a smart kid. I'm going to check white. I didn't really realize what that meant. I was actually kind of proud of myself. Oh, I'm smart. But then later on, I started thinking about it and I was like, what did he mean? I'm smart, and so he's going to check white. It definitely had an impact on me. It actually made me want to fight. Like, it made me want to fight back and say, I can be black and smart. Those are not separate entities. Those are not different things. And my God, I mean, some of the smartest people I know are black people. What a mess.
Right. So for her here, it's enmeshment. She's starting to get to this place where she's tired of how other people are racializing her, and she can just be her full self. And there's lots of biracial people that have to work themselves to the stage. They don't just suddenly appear at this stage, but it's through a series of contextualized experiences that then lead them to this realization that they can be who they are as they are.
Both.
Okay. Then for white people, right? The stage 3B, we'll just say for the sake of simplicity, this is 3B. But you can also kind of treat it as stage 4 too, because like I said, there are some white identifying people that go through the stage of being white supremacists and then come out of that, right? But 3B nonetheless is characterized by a specific kind of white person that can admit that there's a problem. Yeah, they grew up in a society where race was less emphasized. Maybe they didn't see race. They didn't see the importance in it. They had that cognitive dissonance moment. And perhaps their feelings of discomfort, characterized by white guilt or shame, were so overwhelming that it forced them to reframe how they perceived reality. And in the perception of that reality, they did not turn away from the problem or to reinforce the problem, but to admit that a problem exists. Right? And so rather than trying to deny the experiences of people of color, rather than trying to lean into this notion that white people have earned their place in society or deserve to be the apex of what we consider to be normal in society, they start to see that they can be white and have positive racial identification But rather than belittling the perspectives of other people of color, they will just default to them, right? That in order for us to understand to some extent that in order for us to confront racism and the problem of racism in American society, these are a group of white people that I would characterize, for the sake of simplicity, as allies. They're the kinds of people that will emphasize the experiences of people of color and not try to speak for them, not try to advocate for them, but do the best to support them in the ways that they can. Generally, these are also white people that are comfortable with admitting that they're white, talking about other racialized experiences, talking about race and racism without feeling that sort of phenomenon of white fragility. Right. Now, to some extent, for 3B, they might still have difficulty reconciling being white, benefiting from being white, and not being racist, but they're more so leaning towards the phenomenon of empathy and social justice rather than reinforcement of the status quo. And here's what that looks like.
A lot of my other friends assume that like a lot of all like white people, I guess, are upper middle class necessarily, and I know for a fact that me and a couple of my friends that are also white aren't, but I do think that like white privilege, I guess, I do benefit from that, yeah. The advantages of being white kind of outweigh the disadvantages, I guess, because I feel like the only disadvantages, at least like all of the time, are when it comes to things like scholarships and sort of things like that. I mean, a lot of the time, the place where I think that, like, white people, I guess, maybe have a slight disadvantage is when it comes to, like, I guess, like, grants or scholarship money or things like that. But, I mean, that's just kind of, like, one aspect of a person's life. Whereas, I mean, if you weren't white, it would affect everything else about you, I guess. I mean, I think it's kind of sad that you have to say that, but I equally know that a lot of my friends who aren't white have to go through things that I don't. So...
Right. And for those of you who are still listening, it says 62% of students at public colleges are white. They receive 72% of all merit-based scholarships. Right. But here's a young girl who displays the characteristics of stage 3B. She understands that there's a problem. She admits there's a problem. She knows how she benefits from this problem. She didn't ask for it, but she's in support of this, of just the basic principle that there should be fairness, justice, equality in society, and if there's a way that she can help to get us there, she's on board to help us get us there. She displays a characteristic of racial identity development that is unique and distinct from what we call a white supremacist. Okay, so now stage 5, the last stage here. Before we'll open up to the Q&A here. Stage 5 for Black people is going to look like internalization and commitment, right? Perhaps to some extent, they have found ways to translate aspects of their personal identity into a plan of action for the benefit of others, right? And they're usually sustaining that constructive plan of action over time. They find comfort in their own racial identity, despite the fact that there are ongoing racism encounters, a very explicit textbook examples of racism, right? And while I don't necessarily have a video for this, hopefully I'm not being conceited when I say this, but you can look to someone like myself, who I would suspect anyway, displays these kinds of characteristics, right? To some extent, I find comfort in my Blackness. I am aware of my Blackness. I do think that I'm beautiful. I know that Blackness is not monolithic. I know that there's a long way to go in society, but if I can leverage my skills, my aptitude, my articulation, anything that I can to sustain a plan of action that is conducive to the cultivation of a fair, just, and better tomorrow, then that's how I'm leveraging my skills on race, my knowledge of race and racism, but then also my personal experience too, right? For biracial or multiracial people, it looks kind of like the video that we also just saw back before. It's really just about appreciating the multiple aspects of their identity, and then being able to integrate those aspects of their identity into something that works for them. Although it's not mentioned on the screen, I should emphasize that they're more or less taking the same approach that I would say a Black person at stage 5 is taking too, is that they're finding ways to leverage their personal experience and awareness to cultivating a fair, just, inclusive, and better tomorrow, right? We're nearing the end. I'm sorry for going 15 minutes over, I promise. And then for stage 4 for white people is really just immersion and autonomy, right? Now, this white person is embracing their white identity. They're not ashamed of it. They don't have a fear of identifying as white. They don't have a fear or discomfort of talking about race and racism at all. At this point now, they have a deep enough understanding of the problems of what's going on that they're actually trying to develop ways to intervene and to disrupt and dismantle this too. And that they don't see their disruption and dismantling of systems of white supremacy and the reproduction of white advantage as somehow them losing out on something. They don't necessarily see that. And this person in particular, this is what that looks like. This is the last video, by the way.
A rich white person's not going to admit that being white helped them become who they are, because they take a lot of pride in the fact that their family may have not been rich to begin with and are now rich. When I got my job, for example, I walked in there and I just looked clean-cut white person, and they hired me pretty much because of that. And it's just small things that no one really notices, but life's a little bit easier being white, I think. We've come a long way since the civil rights movement, but kids nowadays tend to grow up thinking that the problem's in the past, and there's still just a civil, there's an unjust civil system. I don't feel guilty about the fact that I've been given these advantages. I just feel the need to use these advantages subtly, or whichever way I can, to try to make sure that other people of other races can have the same advantages that I have.
Okay, so now I think there's a deeper philosophical question to ask: is can we trust that this person will be committed to the things that he says he would be committed here to? But nonetheless, it's going to look like this. A person who has developed a racial identity, a stage 4 racial identity, is going to look like they can be autonomous. They're comfortable admitting that there's a problem. They're trying to find whatever ways that they can to mitigate that problem, even as society continues to throw benefits in their direction. They're still committed to trying to find a way to cultivate a fair, just, and equal society for everyone, right? Okay, so collectively, and this will bring us to the end of the discussion, and then I'll open up for Q&A. Collectively here, this should reveal the inherent problems around race and racial identity. It should also very much reveal to you that when you're seeing the kinds of comments that you are when you're exploring my page, for example, there's lots of evidence that is indicative of the stages of racial identity development that people are at. And there are various people at various stages, but most people, especially white people, really are just stuck in stage 1, right? It should also kind of, you should keep in mind, I want to reinforce for you that while I'm talking about these 3 groups here, there are still aspects of racial identity development that have not been discussed here, okay? Because there are racial identities that I have not discussed here, right? So please keep that in mind. And so to some extent, with racial identity development, I think towards the matriculation of a more mature identity is the comfort in how one person or any given person, how they identify for themselves, but noticing and being committed to cultivating a fair, just, and inclusive society for everyone. And when we develop mature aspects of our racial identity that allow us to comfortably talk about the discomforts, the problems of our society without rejection, without fear, without fragility, we can then work towards cultivating a fair, just, and equal society for everyone. That'll close off the discussion for today, or at least not the discussion, but rather the lecture portion. And I'd like to open up the Q&A for everyone who's joined. Thank you so much for joining. Please feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, do what you must here, and just kind of chime in. One of the questions I want to ask you is, did you relate to anything that was articulated here, and how? And would you care to share for those that are listening on IG or might be watching this on YouTube? Also, friendly reminder, those that are listening on IG Live, you're welcome to chime in. Somebody asks, where are the lectures? I'm assuming the lectures you can access on the link in my bio will take you to a Zoom link where you can join us freely. Okay. Would anyone in the chat like to chime in, perhaps share personal experience? Maybe you identified with what we talked about. Maybe you feel like there's something that I'm missing here that I didn't talk about at all, or I was completely wrong. Yeah, Linda, raising your hand. Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Professor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Again, thank you for another great lecture. Really appreciate it. And this was, for me, this was very on point in terms of some things that I've been thinking about. I guess the experience that I mean, I have a lot of different experiences. I guess you can't see me, but I'm an Afro-Latina woman. I identify as being Black because, similar to what some of the other people in the videos said, like, that's just how people see me. I look Black. So it's been confusing for people for me to say that I'm Latina, especially I grew up in California, and that most Latinos in California aren't Black. But I have a white husband, and so we have multiracial children. And I was actually having a discussion around this with my mother-in-law, who happens to be white, yesterday. And I think the stages that you shared with us of racial identity gave me a lot of insight into some of the discussions that we were having, because we've had several different discussions where we've talked about race, state of the country, and I've shared experiences. And I was reflecting just this morning, 3 separate occasions, one of them being yesterday, that when I've shared those experiences, there's an immediate reaction of, well, that's not what they meant, right? That's not what was meant, meaning like that the experience that I shared where white people did a certain thing, like maybe I was misperceiving what I thought was happening. There was another conversation that we had, a few years ago where, I had said something about, how difficult it is being a Black professional, Black executive in this country, and, how difficult it is, and her response to me was, you've experienced bias? And that was just so shocking to me. And I was like, I can't even believe that you said that. Of course, I remember the first time I was told I was smart as a Black person. I mean, just a list of things. And then again, her response to that was, well, that's just being a woman, right? Like, as in her experience as a woman, being a white woman was the same because, women are all in the same boat. And then So yesterday we were with my brother-in-law, who's also Black, and we were having another discussion, and we were talking about, again, veered off into the race conversation and what it's like to be Black in America. And particularly, I was using some of the language that you've given us through our lectures that, we have a racialized experience. And that's what it is. That's how this country's been founded. That's the lens through which we look at things, whether we like to admit it or not, whether we notice it or not. But that is always the underpillar of how things work in this country. And again, like, she rejected that notion. I feel like she's defensive about it. And it was like, no, it's an immigration. Like, we've always had problems with immigrants in this country. Italians have faced these issues. Jews have faced these issues. And I was like, but my brother-in-law and I, we're African American. You just get to be American, which is, what we've talked about in these classes. And then she was silent. She didn't know what to say to that. But yeah, I find it, and I was kind of like, oh my gosh, like, this is happening in real time. All of the things that we've been talking about, I'm seeing it. And so today when you raised the 3 stages, I was like, yeah, she's stuck in stage 1. And that, so I don't even think she knows that she's not a bad person. I think she thinks that I think that she's a bad person because of my reactions to some of the things that she says. She's not a bad person. I don't think she's a bigot, but she's a product of this country, just like we all are. She's a product of her time. And the whole thing makes her profoundly uncomfortable and defensive. Although I think she wouldn't admit the defensiveness, but I just think that this was incredibly helpful. So I guess this wasn't really a question. It was an answer to your question.
No, I absolutely love that. Thank you for sharing your experience. And I hope there's other people in here who might be willing to share their experiences too. But yes, all of the frustrations that you're describing are coming from talking to someone who is stuck in stage 1.
Yes, yes, totally. I feel I feel like this lecture was so on point in terms of what I was thinking about this morning. So thank you so much for that.
The other thing I want to kind of raise here is the same way you were saying, oh my God, all of these elements that we've been talking about, it's showing up in real time and blah, blah, blah. We haven't gotten to the place where I've said or I've taught yet how it's predictive. I think I've given like elements of it in a lecture around theories of racism, but believe it or not, the production of like race pattern disparities, racial inequality is predictive. And there are predictive elements that show up in human behavior and patterns of human behavior. So as you're learning about the things from what I'm teaching you, and then you're seeing them in real time, just keep in mind that there is actually a predictive framework that like the knowledge that I'm sharing with you doesn't exist in just one point in time, but that you can kind of apply it in a predictive context. That if I'm talking to a person who is stuck in stage 1, I can anticipate that they're going to say X, Y, and Z in response to what I share, right? Is there someone else who would like to chime in? Maybe you've got personal experience you can relate to what's being said here. There's someone who says, I agree with the speaker. We can use this to identify where someone is on the scale and target a more appropriate response. And yes, you can, but I want to caution you to use intellectual conservation, or like be slow with this. This is not a way for you to diagnose people. Please do not use this as a way to diagnose somebody that, oh, because they said X, Y, and Z, that like, oh yeah, we know for a fact they're stuck in stage 1. Now, in general, I want you to keep this conceptual because I think that's where the utility is. None of us are psychologists, or at least I'm making the assumption anyway, that none of us are doctors of psychology that are qualified diagnosticians, right? So please just use this with caution. But yes, understand that it is still useful to some extent, that you can take this structured understanding and then apply it to how you encounter other people in society. Is there anyone who wants to chime in and maybe share their own personal experience? I think it was Caleb who said that there was a specific set of experiences that resonated with them. I'm not trying to force you to speak, but
No, no, it's all right. Yeah. I guess it was geez, 2011. I was on vacation with my family in Galveston, and we were visiting a Kroger, I guess, for a pit stop or something. They went to go grocery shopping or something. I went to the restroom, changed the shirt, came back out, and some white lady cashier told the manager, which is wild. He wasn't even white either. He was like Middle Eastern or Indian or something. And they confronted me in the parking lot, told me I was stealing, uh, and that they were like gonna call the cops or something. And my parents came out all confused. My mom was like, "That shirt doesn't come from this store. Like, don't show me in the store where that shirt came from, you know." And yeah, it was pretty awkward. I'm not gonna lie. I don't understand why people have to have some type of entitlement to just, call it out. It could have been the area. I don't know. I know Galveston's not predominantly white, but still, it just doesn't really make any sense to me why they made such a big deal over a T-shirt that didn't belong to their store.
yeah.
So yeah.
Generally, the perpetrators of racial harm, like people who are intentionally persecuting somebody because they're black, because they're Latino, or because they're illegal or whatever, those are generally people who have they develop a sense of racial identity and then end up in stage 3A. And they display characteristics of stage 3A, where there's internalization of like social values. There's conscious awareness that like certain racial groups or identities are like bad, and that like to some extent it's on them to be like behavior police or like the racial police to like persecute those other people, in essence reinforcing those stereotypes. So generally the perpetrators of racial harm are 3A, stage 3A types of individuals. And so that's likely what you encountered there.
Yeah, it definitely went down like that. And I mean, I don't consciously think about it every day, but that video of the guy with the afro with the glasses that was going from the third floor to the first floor, the record floor, waiting on his friend, that kind of brought it up. I was like, man, that's something that definitely happened to me, and it was it was definitely a reminder. We don't see those videos of them people caught on tape being racist to other people, and it's triggering for sure. And I guess I remember that encounter I had at that Kroger, and it comes back to it's not going nowhere. We're in 2025, and people still acting up.
Yeah, sure. And that's the thing is when you start hearing other people who are articulating similar experiences, similar circumstances, to some extent it's going to be triggering, but hopefully there's some aspect of it that's also validating too. Like to know in a way you're not alone. You're not the only one who experiences those kinds of things. I've certainly had those kinds of experiences too. And it hopefully to some extent it is reassuring that like you're valid in how you feel,
Yeah,
and that there are
it's
other
definitely
people
a
who experience
confirmation.
those things, and it's a confirmation. Somebody
Yeah.
named Stubby Metzi says, "I am late today. I will have to listen and reply. I'm a black woman whose mother is white. I was raised in a Catholic school environment that had to deal with racial harm of people stuck every day." Yeah, Stubby, please. I will do my best to make sure that this lecture gets uploaded on YouTube. For those of you who are interested in just listening to any of the lectures that we've talked about, the discussions that we've had, you can always follow me on YouTube, subscribe, and I try to upload them regularly. Right now, I'm in like midterm season right now, so I don't anticipate that things will be too much slower, but I've got to do midterms. So sometime later in the week, you can expect for this recording to be uploaded. Okay. Is there anyone else in the chat that wants to chime in? Did anything resonate with you? Did anything stick out to you? Maybe you felt like maybe I was just flat out wrong about something. I invite you to chime in and share your perspective. I'd love to hear from you. No one. Okay. Well, in general, I'll tell you this. I think it would be useful in American society if we learned how to understand the ways that racial identities develop, but it requires for certain groups of people to admit that racialized experiences exist. In essence, it almost requires them to evolve past stage one, not evolve, but to develop rather a sense of identity beyond stage one. Is America ready for that kind of conversation? Frankly, I don't think that there should be a necessarily consideration of whether or not you're ready, but rather that these conversations are important to have. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Somebody says this person is Zol Tizu. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Grew up first gen Mexican American, but grew up going to a mostly white K through 8 school. Feel free to chime in and share your experience. I'll read it out loud. Maybe we can have a conversation about it. Matt Stevens says, was about to ask, was there a discussion on the development of racial identity? Yes, that's what the topic of discussion was for today. That's what we were talking about, and we're now in the Q&A portion of that discussion. If you would like to hear what was discussed, to see the slides, to watch the videos, follow me on YouTube, and then this video will be uploaded to my YouTube page. You'll be able to watch it and essentially to see what we've been talking about this entire time. But I'd like to hear, there's plenty of people in the chat. I'd love to hear if there's someone else that would like to chime in, share a personal experience, maybe the ability to relate to the stages of racial identity development. Perhaps you occupied 2 different stages at once or something like that. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, is it Usuario? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that.
no, notice bag.
Okay.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I would like to add something. Well, I think that we are all not born black people, right? Race or racist. We just racism is taught at home, in schools, in society in general, and we need to, actually we need to recognize that racism is taught. We were not born racist, right? And the first thing, and the other is to just to recognize that when someone says that we must learn to live as brothers or we're gonna perish like fools, Martin Luther King Jr. said once this saying, and I really agree with him because we need to learn to live in this planet as brothers. I'm Brazilian. I'm not American. I'm Brazilian, and I see that in Brazilian society we have a lot of racists. We have a lot of cases that people are being racist. So much violence around, but I need to think that education is one of our important weapons to use against racism. Racism. And having said that, I think that in my society, I try a lot just to make people aware of their position in society, that we are all being black or being white people. We need to live together, to respect each other, and to see that everyone has a role and a place in this world. That's my point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, and I absolutely agree with you. I actually have a follow-up question for you, but first I want to confirm what you're saying here because I fundamentally agree with you. Racism is not something that we're born with; it's something that we're taught, and perhaps the elements of all of my lectures would show to you that it is in fact something that is taught. It's absorbed in the cultural values. It's not necessarily something that is inherent. And education, me telling and teaching about identity development, teaching about how to identify race pattern disparities, eventually I'm going to be teaching about how to disrupt and dismantle them too. The educational component is what's fundamental to undermining racism and racial inequality. But I have a follow-up question, and my question is, I mentioned in the context of this lecture, I don't know how much you heard. I mentioned in this lecture that um, I was only talking about things in the context of the United States of America because I can't assign stages of identity development outside of the cultural context that I have expertise in. My question to you is, in the context of Brazil, do you see anything that is similar to what I have been talking about here, or would you say that racial identity development is fundamentally different to some extent? Can you speak on this?
Well, I think that there are some points that are so similar, and there are points that are different because we have our own cultural points or cultural aspects that are different in some at some extent and similar in another ways. So I would say that we can see scenes, live scenes or live situations that are similar, just like violence, so much violence against black people here, so many cases of racism that you can find on a daily basis. But also, I think that dealing with this content or this I wouldn't like to say problem, but this condition, for example, dealing with this condition, we can deal with it in a different way. But some points are similar, some points are different. But I'm trying to answer your question clearly. I don't know if I'm making myself clearly,
Yeah, it's
but
clear enough. Yeah.
yeah, and but I would like to say that we need to. This kind of conversation is so important. That's why I'm here. Maybe just me as a Brazilian here. Maybe all of you are Americans. But when I see someone going live with and opening this space for other people, I think it's important for other cultures or other countries, people like me participating or joining you and giving my point of view, my thoughts about the content, because you can see a different background and maybe you can have an idea what's going on in my country. So, replying to your question or answering your question, there are points that are similar, there are points that are different, and we deal with a different way the same situation. But before being white or black or Asian, we are human beings. This is so important to make. I know that we are living a structural racism because it's a kind of it's difficult to. It's not so easy. It's not that easy just to say, yeah, we're gonna live as brothers and sisters, and everything goes right, and everything is gonna be fine. But it's not so easy. I was having a conversation with a friend who lives in New York City. She's from there. She's a psychologist, clinical psychologist too. And she told me, I told her, if there was one place, only one place that everyone can go, maybe we are gonna have more justice in the world. For example, a bus school here in Brazil. If we have only one bus, so black people, white people needs to take the same bus, right? But maybe we can reduce this injustice, this level of injustice in our society. But she told me, but even though we have only one bus, maybe the black people are gonna put at the back of the bus. And when she said this, I just realized that the racism happens in so different ways in depending on the culture, right? Depending on the country, depending on societies. In Brazil, we can see it clearly. Clearly, you can see a lot of cases that you can find people being racist.
It's like
And
in your face.
yes, yes, yes. But there is a law here. There is a law in my town, for example. I live in a small town in Brazil, and there is a law that if you do this kind of things, you can be punished, legally speaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if I made myself clear. Sorry
No,
for my.
I understand. I think it's interesting, and I would encourage you to please come back to next week's session too, because I want to
Thank you.
have diverse cultural perspectives, and that would actually help me to better address perhaps the limitations in the knowledge that I'm sharing. A lot of the stuff that I'm talking about is really limited to the United States, and it would help if I had cultural perspectives outside of the U.S., right? So
Thank
things
you.
like that
Thank
are
you.
important. I appreciate your contribution. There was something that was said, I think, that resonated with me a little bit earlier around being Black and Latino. Is my grandmother was born in Guatemala. She immigrated to the United States when she was 20 years old. And so in my grandmother's household, before she passed, this was at least early in my childhood, this was a primarily Spanish speaking household. I have uncles and aunts and cousins whom are also Black, but speak Spanish in this household. We all grew up in Portland, Oregon. And I don't identify as Blacktino or Black and Latino at all. Part of that is because how I've been raised. I'm not biracial, but I've been raised to identify myself as African American. And so before my grandmother passed, and even including my cousins, Alice, BB, for example, hopefully they're listening. I don't know. They speak Spanish. And I grew up around my grandmother speaking Spanish, and I would respond to her in English, and then it never even crosses my mind. It rarely crosses my mind that an aspect of my identity is, in fact, Latino and from Central America. And I don't even identify that way because of how I was raised. And how I was raised was, yes, around your grandmother, speak Spanish. Around your grandmother and your family members, you understand Spanish, but when you go out, you're Black. And so you identify as Black, and everyone will see you as Black. And so you identify as African American. And then I grow up with the same sort of stages of identity development that we've been talking about in this lecture. And even as I'm talking about it, I'm not even recalling being Black and Latino. And I think it was Linda who was saying this to some extent. Just for the sake of simplicity, that's how you identify, because it adds a layer of complexity when you throw in the Spanish speaking aspect. So I just wanted to throw that out there and say that resonated with me too.
I would like to ask you a question.
Oh
I
yeah,
would like to
please,
ask you a
please,
question.
please, please.
Is there any kind of government policies that assures Black people to ascend in their career, or government position, or to have a job, to have a better job? Is there a kind of policy that guarantees that, or that assures you an opportunity to give the Black people opportunity to grow in their career or
Yeah.
professional?
Yeah. No, there isn't. And this has been a point of contention in our country for decades now, is believe it or not, the best way to fix problems of racial inequality is to fix them, which means giving people of historically marginalized backgrounds advantages that they would not otherwise have. And yet, in American society, because our society is white supremacist, it's white normative, there are large numbers of white majority that find proposals around these policies to be racist or fundamentally discriminatory against white people. Now, to some extent, there is one aspect of this argument that I think has merit, and that is merit, right? That you do want to hire people for their skills, for their expertise, for their experience, and not necessarily for their racial identity. And yet, having said that, I also recognize that there are limitations to this argument too. And those limitations are, well, we don't really fix inequality, we don't cultivate equality as we would like to if we're not intentionally trying to seek out those we want to better represent what we would consider to be equal or fair or just in American society. So, no, we do not have those policies. And the reason we don't have them is because there's a large group of people that think that they are unfair.
Oh yeah, thank you, thank you. Okay, thank you for accepting me and for having me. And I hope that I can join us if you allow me to join you all next meeting.
Please do.
It will be a great pleasure to have to be here and to share a little bit about Brazil or about my thoughts.
Absolutely,
Okay?
Absolutely.
See you.
All right, take care.
Take care.
So yeah, I mean that's where we're at with racial identity development. And for something like this, if you know somebody that you feel like would benefit from exposure to this kind of lecture, please point them to my YouTube page, tell them to subscribe, have them watch these videos, share them as far as you can. Maybe you can use these things as a learning resource for classes that you're teaching or organizational spaces that you're around for people to better understand these kinds of conversations. Somebody in the chat says CRT and DEI is so important to have as foundational and constitutional parts of our society. I fundamentally agree with you. I think that if we want to take pride in living in a fair, just, and equal America, and we want to say that that's a hallmark of American society, then we actually have to be intentional about that. It can't just be a reflection of our emotional sentiments. It also has to be something that we're intentionally leaning into and recognizing that at all stages of development, going back to colonization itself, America was never racially monolithic. What we're calling America, the colonies, it was never racially monolithic. It was never a white country. It was never just a Christian country. It was, in fact, made up of diverse global cultures, including those that are native to the Americas. And to some extent, we need to lean into and embracing that. And part of embracing that means embracing a diverse America and not on this fallacious notion of a white America. Okay. Now, next week, I'm going to be talking about, I'm just kind of choosing these things as I go along. I don't even really have a game plan here. I don't know how people like organize their podcasts. So you'll have to forgive me for doing this on the fly, but I know that a lot of people found this information very valuable. And so please help to support me in any way that you can. And I suppose next week, maybe we'll talk about colorism. Maybe we'll talk about sexual health in the Black community. Maybe we'll talk about reparations. I'm not quite sure just yet. Yeah, Caleb, raise your hand. You've got 9 minutes. We've got 9 minutes left, so please feel free to chime in.
You hear me, Doctor?
Yes, I can.
Man, appreciate you. So I wanted to ask you the question because I really don't want to ask ChatGPT, but I mean, what does an American even look like, you know?
So I lean into this notion that America is the first global country, if that makes sense, meaning that we were always a nation of immigrants. And so because we have a process of naturalizing immigrants as American citizens who not only then get to vote, but to participate in the full benefits of what belongs to an American, that when we're talking about what an American looks like, an American looks like all of us. There is no such thing as an American that isn't. There are Americans with accents. There are Americans that weren't born here. There are Americans that were here undocumented and then essentially worked towards citizenship. I'll just give you the example because I feel safe in saying this. It's been many years past. My uncle, son of my grandmother from Guatemala, my uncle was born in Guatemala. Black. We look very similar, although we still look distinct because he has a different dad, okay, than my dad. He was born here and he was brought here. Essentially, to my knowledge, I could be wrong here. He was brought here without documentation, and then he went into the Air Force. Okay, he started going into the Air Force, and he contributed to the country. He retired from the Air Force. He gained citizenship because of basically his commitment to the Air Force, and he's an American. And even before he got his American citizenship, I'll tell you, he's acculturated to American society. You would have never guessed that this black man was born in a Spanish-speaking country and did not have U.S. citizenship. Okay, and so even today, he's an American. He has flown a flag in my honor that's hanging on my wall, right? And I haven't participated in the military at all, even though I was born here. So what is an American? An American is all of us. I remember seeing a video on YouTube of, I think it was an Asian senator, maybe a councilman or something like that. An Asian person had I want to say a distinctly Asian accent. I don't know what country, where this person was from, but he's talking to a woman during a meeting about the sacrifices that he's made. And then he lifts up his shirt and he shows scars and wounds that he received during his service, where he was injured during his military service. And he's saying, this is what your rights and freedoms cost, right? Here's what being an American is. And he's saying this with, I'm just going to throw a guess out there because I really don't know. He has like a Chinese accent. Okay. So for me, in answering your question, I think an American really is just representative of the global population. We're the first global country. What does an American look like? It looks like all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken, we haven't heard from, that would like to chime in about today's topic of discussion? Maybe we're talking about identity, or maybe you just have a random question that has nothing to do with anything. You're not forced to talk about anything. Maybe there's some people that want to kind of give some influence into what we talk about next week. I have no idea. Feel free, Vera.
Yeah, I have a question. This is a wealth of knowledge. I think this is the fifth time I attended. Is there any works for you of publishing a book on any of this?
So I have my thing is a mixed bag with this. Okay, I want to publish a book. I have lots of original ideas. In fact, a lot of the original ideas I'm just straight up sharing with you all. I'm working on select manuscript publications to peer-reviewed journals, but in terms of a book, like a, cover to cover, 150 pages, maybe more kind of thing, I don't have anything like that in the works. Now, having said that, here's the reason why. Okay, you can call me a pessimist for this, and I'm willing to take the flack. I am of the belief that the average layperson does not read. And because they don't read, I have this personal life goal of mine to make an impactful contribution to American society in a constructive way. And if I am trying to target audiences that don't read, what's the best way to reach them? I have landed on the answer being film. Okay, so I have worked on several film projects in the past. Maybe I could talk about the impact of film in racial justice. I have no idea. But I'm working on several projects right now. One of them involves interviewing people, just like the videos we watched today, coincidentally, for their own lived experiences with race and racism. And I am working to develop a website where you can essentially sort through hundreds of these interviews, perhaps on racial identity, perhaps on sexual identity, perhaps on religious identity, and to listen to these people answer select questions. And you can kind of filter through, and it would be a learning resource or a learning repository of these kinds of interviews, where you might encounter some people who are articulating what we would call conservative politics or ideologies, but you're also encountering a wide variety of perspectives beyond that too, including ideas that might directly challenge those concepts, right? And so that, to me, is like a more impactful way to get to the hearts and minds of people who turn on Netflix, who turn on Hulu, and don't really turn their attention to scientific manuscripts, or they're looking to buy books on Amazon. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And I'm so sorry. Like, I want to write a book. Like, it is a life goal of mine to have a publication under my belt. I have friends and colleagues that have published, and I want to be just like them. But like right now, I'll just tell you what I tell everybody. My goal is to become like the Neil deGrasse Tyson of anti-racism. If I could be that guy who's like LeVar Burton, I've got like a docu-series where I can just explain these concepts in episodic format and generate some kind of positive nationwide discussion about race and racism in this context. I that's the kind of person I want to be. Now, publications will come beyond that, but I think film is like the most effective medium in social media, in the age of the internet, and things like that. I'm also actually, believe it or not, I'm working on a screenplay. I'm about 30 pages into this. I'm not a screenwriter, but I'm taking a stab at it. And this is exploring my personal experience through another fictional character of my time in Japan, and reflecting on basically becoming acculturated to Japanese society as a young teenage Black American. So like, in lots of ways, I'm trying to find ways to reach the hearts and minds of people to explore nuance around race and racism. But books, for me, it's not, because I am articulate. I'm a book nerd myself. I'm a bookworm, but a lot of people don't read, and so that hasn't been that much of a priority for me.
Got it. And then put him in order: LeBron James, Kobe, and Michael.
Okay. Damn. All right. Okay. All right. Fine. Starting with number 1, Kobe.
Yeah.
Number 2, Jordan. Number 3, James. Okay. Now, people are gonna hate me for this. I have nothing against LeBron James. I love LeBron James. Having said that, I was a big NBA fan when I was like 17, 18, maybe 20 or something like that. And it was when LeBron James was playing the finals for his first ring, and I started seeing the refs making calls in his favor that I felt like he didn't actually deserve. Now, having said that, he totally deserves an NBA ring. He deserves to get to the playoffs and all. But in that particular season, I was kind of disillusioned, and so no shade to LeBron James, but I would put him at number 3.
No, we can still be friends because I have my Kobe shirt on.
There
So
we go.
Kobe's my number 1.
There we go. All right. Well, that will wrap up for today. Thank you so much for participating. I hope to see you all in this forum next week. I saw somebody that said, "Hey, yeah, let's talk about colorism." So fuck it. Next week we're talking about colorism. I'll make sure my lectures are ready for that. We'll go ahead and we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much for participating, and I will see you all next week. Take care.